On this episode of What the Ship, we look at the top 5 stories as of May 7th, 2025. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. Man, a lot of ship happening across the world. We've got 5 big stories. We're going to delve right into them. We've been looking at U.S. ports quite intensely here because of the tariffs. I want to zoom out, do more of a macro approach, and talk about some big stories that are happening around the world that deal with global shipping. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. So our first story takes us to one of our favorite spots on the planet. That's right, the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and wait for it, the Bab el-Mandab. That's right, the BAM. Cheers. A little tradition here at What's Going On with Shipping. Take a drink every time we talk about that little strait there connecting the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. We've been talking about this region since November of 2023 when the Houthis staged their initial attack on the motor vessel Galaxy Leader. Helicopter assault overtook the ship and then began a series of attacks against global shipping. The United States responded with Operation Prosperity Guardian, along with the UK and other navies, and we have been following this ever since. I am very critical of the Houthi for a variety of reasons, the least of which is that the Houthi have attacked over 100 ships since November of 2023. A very small majority of those, or excuse me, very small minority of those, are connected to Israel. Most of the vessels that they attack have nothing to do with this. They are just attacking and terrorizing innocent ships and mariners. They've killed 4 mariners. I know that pales in comparison what's happening in Israel and Gaza. Still doesn't give you justification to go out and kill 3 Filipino and 1 Vietnamese merchant mariner and sink 2 ships. However, we have news stories coming out right now about this. So, first story, Trump says Houthi will stop attacking ships in the Red Sea. If you haven't been following, for nearly 45 days, the United States has been initiating a new operation called Operation Rough Rider. Great piece over in USNI News by Heather Mongilio that talks about this. 45 days, 1,000 targets, no end in sight. This has been a renewed series of offensives launched from the deck of the aircraft carrier USS Harry S. Truman, later joined by the USS Carl Vinson. These attacks have been on the scale of what the Israelis have been doing with bombing Yemen. Now, I should note that we have not seen a lot of attacks coming out of Yemen recently. If we go and look at the most recent report by the UK MTO, this is the United Kingdom's Maritime Trade Operations, and the Joint Maritime Information Center, what we see is not a lot of attacks. This is the most recent report released by them. Here is the incidences they have. Only really one major incident or incident at all since January of 2025. Really a suspicious activity in the Red Sea, Arabian Sea area with a lot of GPS interference. Here's the tracking of ships sailing through the area. They look at the BAM, cheers, the Suez Canal, and the Cape of Good Hope. Cape of Good Hope is the southern coast of Africa, and what you'll see here is a marked decrease starting in January of 2024 of the number of vessels sailing through the BAM, through the Suez, and most of that traffic is going around the Cape of Good Hope. And what we see in terms of quantifying that, about 40% of all ships are diverting around, and largely that is vessels that are of greater value than about $100 million. And that has to do with the war risk insurance. We're going to come back to that in a second. If you want to go back and look at the historical attacks since 2019, the Washington Institute has a great site on this. Noam Meridan and Farzan Nadimi have put together an interactive site, really well done, strongly recommended. I'll have the link in the show notes. And if you just want a quick little track, this shows you the height of the attacks really starting back in November of 2023, peaking in December of 2023. This is when U.S. vessels really determined to avoid the area, really came in January. And then you can see how the attacks have kind of petered off here. And we really have not seen major attacks since January of 2025. Now, the story over in Lloyd's List talks about the fact that the president has made this landmark announcement that Houthis will stop attacking ships. This comes out of a statement from the Omani foreign minister, which was posted on X. Quote, neither side will target the other, including American vessels in the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandab Strait, ensuring freedom of navigation and the smooth flow of international commercial shipping. Responses from the Houthi media and officials do not explicitly say that they will stop attacking all commercial vessels in the Red Sea, although there have been no reported attacks in recent months. Go on here. This is a report out of FreightWaves. Houthis deny the Trump's claim of a Red Sea ceasefire. So I'm not exactly sure if we have a ceasefire or we don't have a ceasefire. We know that the Israelis just hit Yemen again, hitting their airport at Sana'a. The United States is holding off on any further strikes. The Trumans had a couple of incidents recently. They've had one F-18 shot down by their own ship, the USS Gettysburg. They had one F-18 roll off the elevator during high-speed maneuvers. That was during an attack, a ballistic missile attack, where the carrier was ordered to withdraw from the area. Let me be clear. I sailed on a hospital ship during the first Persian Gulf War. We were ordered to vacate the area quickly when two Iraqi F-1s decided to come screaming down the Persian Gulf between Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf coast. We were ordered to vacate the area immediately. I was on the bridge at the time. I gave our ship a hard rudder order to get us out of the area because we were told to basically put some distance between us. And I sent things flying on that ship. I mean, literally flying. Got kind of yelled at for the hard rudder I gave. It sounds like a similar thing happened on board the Lincoln. And then another F-18 just the other day had an incident either during landing or catapult, which does happen a lot, at least once a tour usually on an aircraft carrier. So 3 F-18s lost by the Truman so far in this strike. However, the bigger issue is this. I think there's more at play here. So at the very beginning of this operation, and I have numerous videos you can go back and take a look at. I'll have the links up here for you. You can go look at them all. But one of the things I said from the very beginning is military is not going to solve this. You can bomb the Houthi all day long. You're not going to do anything. You're going to move rocks around. You're not going to do it. The Saudis bombed the Houthis for 10 years. It didn't do anything. And what they're dealing with is a maritime version of insurgency. They're dealing with a maritime insurgency. That's what the Houthi are. We should have learned, or at least I don't know if the Navy was paying attention to the Army fighting an insurgency in Afghanistan and Iraq over the past 20 years, but we're fighting an insurgency in terms of the Houthi. What the Houthi are doing is causing havoc, but it's not the Houthi, I got to say. It's insurance. The threat of the Houthi caused war risk insurance to go up, and war risk insurance is what's keeping ships from sailing through this region. It's not the Houthi. It's because if you have to pay a 1% war risk insurance on a ship worth $100 million, that's $1 million. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to pay. And you're more likely to go around Africa than go through the Red Sea. Why is that? Well, if you pay the $1 million of insurance, you still got to go through the Suez Canal. And so you got to pay a Suez Canal fee. So it's more expensive to actually physically go through this region than to go around. Plus, the shipping lines actually don't mind going around Africa. It gives them higher shipping rates. It also puts more ships on service. It's better for them. And so there is no real compulsion here to reopen the Red Sea, which raises the question then is why has the U.S. initiated an operation to bomb the Houthis for several months now? And I think it goes to a larger issue, a couple of sub-stories behind the scenes. One, President Trump is trying to get the Egyptians to give U.S. flag vessels free passage through the Suez. That is a moneymaker. Let me be clear. That is a huge amount of money right there. If you don't have to pay $500,000 to go through the Suez Canal, great amount of money to have in your hands. And so that will be an interesting one if that happens. Second, we just saw President Trump's nominee for the Maritime administration get pulled. It initially was Brent Sadler from the Heritage Foundation. Now it's going to be Steve Carmel. Steve is a consummate maritime professional, graduate of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. He has been a vice president for Maersk Lines Limited, the U.S. version of Maersk Lines, and he is president of US MMI. That was an offshoot of Maersk Lines Limited. It was basically their vessel operating company with government contracts. So Steve's nomination is now up. It is public, so I posted it right there for you so I can talk about it. I knew about this a couple of days ago, but it's now out there for everyone. I think there's something at play here. Let's go to our buddies at Marine Traffic. This is every U.S. flag commercial vessel sailing around the world today. And you'll notice right around here where the Houthis are, there's no U.S. ships. No U.S. ships have sailed through this area since January of 2024. And most of the vessels are taking the long diversion around. You'll see a whole batch of Maersk vessels here heading around, a ship of Liberty going around, but they're taking that diversion around Africa. I think there's a play here by the Trump administration to execute this military operation against the Houthi, and now they're going to switch and try to start bringing U.S. flag vessels through this region. Steve's connection with Maersk Lines Limited, with USMMI, is a good one because he'll have a relationship with these companies, and maybe what we'll start seeing is very similar to what the European Union has been doing with running ships of CMA CGM, of Messina Lines. Those are French and Italian shipping companies through the region. What we may start seeing here is U.S. shipping companies start running through this region. If they run through this region, if the U.S. works at basically subsidizing or offsetting the cost for the war risk insurance, the U.S. could assume the burden for the war risk insurance, the government, or they can actually pay for it themselves or sit there and say they'll underwrite the vessels. Add to that maybe a free passage through the Suez Canal for U.S. flag vessels. That could conceivably open up the Red Sea for U.S. shipping. The problem is getting the shipping companies to agree to do it, because the big onus here is not the Houthis, it's not the attacks, it is the insurance and whether or not this is within good business models. One of the fundamental issues that U.S. military and U.S. politics has, along with many governments and many other militaries around the world, is they don't understand commercial shipping. They just don't. They don't know what makes it tick. And risk aversion and profit is what makes it tick. That's it. I can tell you right now, that's what it is. And if you can minimize the risk and show that this is going to generate profit for the shipping lines, that works. And Steve is probably the best person with his connections to industry to put into the Maritime Administration to be an advocate from the Department of Transportation side. So not a surprise that we see his nomination in. The past three Maritime administrators have been from the Navy. I know Brent Sadler really well. He is a brilliant person, well-read, well-articulated. He is just, I'm not going to be surprised to see him in a different position, but it looks like if Steve Carmel with his nomination comes in, I am watching to see what is the play here. Do we start seeing some commercial vessels going through? We haven't seen much movement through the Red Sea beyond the vessels that are currently going through there. So do we start seeing a difference? That's going to be something we're going to have to wait and tell. Story number 2, can't get away from tariffs. We still have to talk a little bit about tariffs because that is one of the big issues that's driving commercial shipping right now. This story over at G Captain from Bloomberg, World's Trade Superhighway feels strain from U.S.-China decoupling. It's a really interesting story because of the in-depth research they did on one particular ship. They did a deep dive on the motor vessel OOCL Violet. Now, OOCL, that is Orient Overseas Container Line. Nobody calls it that anymore because Orient is not really good to say it. OOCL was a Hong Kong-based company, but it's now part of COSCO, the Chinese Overseas Shipping Company, part of the big, huge behemoth that is Chinese shipping. But when you break down OOCL Violet's arrival in Long Beach, they were able to get a handle on the manifest of the vessel and look at the Customs and Border Protection tariff fees on it. So let's take a look at that. Here are the tariff rates that were charged during the voyage of OOCL Violet. So the ship departed Dalian, China on April 2nd. When it left on April 2nd, the tariff had been set at 20%. At April 7th, cargo was loaded in Ningbo. And in Ningbo, the tariff had been raised up to 45%. By the time the ship left Shanghai on April 10th, the full maximum tariff, 145%, was levied, meaning that it actually had staggered cargo on board at different tariff levels. Tariff is set on the day cargo is loaded. Ship stopped at Busan and then eventually arrived out in Long Beach. We're talking about a ship 16,828 TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units. This is one of the largest type vessels that come into the United States. Bloomberg broke this down in the following. So first, electrical equipment and parts. So days after Trump escalated his retaliatory tariffs against China, a CBP bulletin announced a carve-out for some electronic products. About $4.7 million worth of Chinese-made TV monitors, laptops, and other accessories aboard the Violet are likely excluded, lowering the average tariff rate for the category to 67%, meaning $44 million worth of electronic equipment and parts were loaded on board. The tariff for that is going to be $29 million. Cars and car parts were also excluded from the retaliatory tariffs. Instead, they were hit with a 45% tariff, excluding any overlapping steel or aluminum tariffs, while car parts faced a 20% rate, among the lowest for Chinese goods. So you're looking at a value of $33 million. That's a tariff of $19 million. And when you look at furniture, that $27 million worth of furniture loaded on board has a tariff of $21 million. Looking at 5.7 million pounds of Chinese-sourced knitted apparel aboard the Violet, that incurred the highest estimated new tariff. Nearly three-quarters of the good were likely subject to the top rate. This category included everything from major brands such as women's vests destined for raw stores to work gloves valued at $230,000 heading to Kansas City. $117 million worth of goods, $137 million worth of tariffs. Thousands of dollars in additional tariffs hinged on when goods were loaded. Big Joe Forklift, based in Nebraska, paid an extra $109,000 because $95,000 worth of its pickers and other warehouse equipment were loaded onto the ship 2 days after the maximum rate took effect. So $90 million worth of cargo, you're paying a tariff of $62 million. What does that translate into? Of the total value of cargo on board, $564 million, there is $417 million worth of tariffs. The Chinese goods subject to the full 145% tariff was $231 million worth of goods, and those subject below the 145 tariff was about $248 million worth of goods. And goods from other countries totaling $85 million were subjected to $7 million worth of tariffs. So a lot of people asking how this breaks down on a ship. There you go. There's the OOCL Violet with its breakdown, and we can expect to see that kind of throughout ships heading in. Remember, LA Long Beach are going to get the vast majority of cargo coming in from China. They average anywhere between 50 and 60% of their cargo come in from China. Other ports, less than that, especially on the East and Gulf Coast ports, and we're expecting to see that impact here shortly on the East and Gulf Coast. For our third story, let's look at global containers. So first, looking at the U.S., so new bookings are all pointing toward a plunge in U.S. imports starting in May and June. So we're seeing around a 40% decrease in recent weeks. That's coming from data I talked about yesterday that was from MSNBC, that was put in that Lorianne Laraco story. This is from Lloyd's List. U.S. import bookings from all countries are down 20% in recent weeks. Data on estimated cargo arrivals in top U.S. ports could suffer a 30% year-on-year drop in import volumes in May and June. We're probably going to see something akin to what we saw when COVID hit in March of 2020, where, if you remember the chart I showed you yesterday, we saw those cargo volumes bottom out. The question is, how fast do they start coming back up? Meanwhile, we see this, Asia-Europe rates under strain amid shifting capacity from China and U.S. trade. So the Asia-Europe spot rates continue to fall amid excess capacity from new ship deliveries and vessels shifting from China-U.S. trade. Showed the rates the other day, and we saw that little bit of a downtick there. At least 117,000 TEUs moved from China, those are 20-foot equivalents, from China-U.S. routes to Asia-Europe routes since April, worsening the oversupply and limiting rate recovery. Finally, Red Sea disruptions and trade tensions are persisting. Some capacity may return to U.S. routes if trade talks between Beijing and Washington progress, but oversupply will likely linger. Meanwhile, you see stories like this over at GCAP from Reuters. Vietnam shipments from China to U.S. reach record high amid trade fraud crackdown. So everybody's looking at, is China laundering their cargo by going through other ports? There's a note the other day about an increased number of ships from China going through Korea, through Vietnam, and other places. Obviously, this is going to be taxing CBP's ability to determine the origin of cargoes. It's going to get really tough. They're overworked, I guarantee you right now, in enforcing these tariffs, along with the elimination of the de minimis shipment exemptions that's happening. These is all cargo under $800. Then we have this story. Box ships are backing up across Northern Europe. This is from Sam Chambers over at Splash 24/7. We're seeing this backup. Ports across Northern Europe are dealing with what broker Braemar describes as serious congestion right now. We had a strike in the ports of Antwerp and Zeebrugge in Belgium, and now what we're seeing is this element of excess cargo and capacity coming in. In Antwerp, reportedly, as of yesterday, the yard is already at 96% capacity, and we're seeing this basically a jam up in these northern European yards. When you get congestion in yards, cargo slows down. It takes more time for the cargo handlers to sort through the boxes and get the right boxes to the ships and get the other boxes off the yard into inland transportation systems and coastal shipping. This is going to be a big problem. The other story I'm noticing is this one. Container futures, yes, there are container futures. If you want to bid on the future of containers, you can do this. Container futures rally as U.S.-China trade hopes outweigh Red Sea ceasefire. The Shanghai freight futures jumped, led by the August contract and optimism over upcoming China-U.S. trade talks. I'm glad somebody's being optimistic in this group, so we're glad to see that. Investors are largely ignoring the Red Sea ceasefire, which is probably the best thing to do right now, seeing the limited immediate impact. Analyst says the rally was sentiment-driven, with Asia-Europe trade remaining under pressure from an oversupply of vessels, regardless of changes on trans-Pacific routes. Talked about the other day that a lot of these container companies are going to be reshuffling their ships around because they want to get the Chinese-built ships off the U.S. trade for fear that the U.S. Trade Representative's port fees come into effect. Story number 4 takes us to Matson Lines. Now, Matson is a company that operates in the U.S. It is a Jones Act carrier. That means they operate largely within the closed cabotage trade. They operate a fleet of vessels that are U.S.-owned, U.S.-built, U.S.-flagged, U.S.-crewed, but they also have some ships in the international trade. So Matson provides an inside look at severe tariff disruptions to the trans-Pacific trade. Now, trans-Pacific volume sank 30% in April, but Matson expects need to avert the empty shelves will force U.S. importers to resume more shipments. This is the thing. I don't know if we can sever ourselves from China, even with 145% tariffs. We're seeing that right now, a 30% reduction in shipments coming in. Remember, we get 40% of all our import goods from China, so there's still Chinese goods coming in. Add the front loading, all the cargo that came in up front, the shifting to other sources, Vietnam, India, Cambodia, all these other countries we're getting stuff from. It's not clear we can really sever ourselves. The market in Trans-Pacific is, to use the Matson phrase, all over the place in terms of pricing and is still in the early part of readjusting. Exports from Vietnam to U.S. have rebounded to pre-tariff announcement levels. Some cargo has also returned to the China-U.S. route after the initial phase. So Matson is sitting there saying, listen, we're seeing this decrease. Everybody's seeing it, but we think it's going to come back up again. Maybe not to the levels we wanted it to be at, but we're also seeing a shift in how cargo is moving. I did a story the other day talking about a ship fire that took place in the port of Zeebrugge over in Belgium, and I compared it to the fire that took place on board the Grand Costa d'Avorio back in 2023, where 2 firefighters died. These were Newark firefighters. The Ntsb has released a supplemental report. They had come out with a report earlier, but then they had another announcement, and this is what came out. This is from G-Captain. Profoundly concerned, Ntsb chair calls out training gap in shipboard firefighting. The fire that took place in Zeebrugge was textbook. I would argue it was probably one of the best shipboard firefighting vehicle fires we've seen. It involved electrical vehicles, which are insanely dangerous. For those of you who don't know, I've been a paid and volunteer firefighter for 20-something years now. That's one of my old helmets. I've been a captain in my volunteer fire department for 18 years. Always a captain, never promoted. I just stay a captain. But I deal with electrical vehicle firefighting, and electrical vehicles suck. They're terrible. They're just terrible to fight fires against, because they don't go out, because the lithium-ion batteries self-oxidize and they don't go out. You can dump them in the ocean, they're still going to burn. They just burn. They burn hot, they burn long. They just burn. There's nothing more I can say about it. On board a ship, that's even worse, because you can't put them out. Now, at Zeebrugge, they did exactly what you're supposed to do. They did the textbook operation. When they realized they couldn't get the fire out initially, they sealed the compartment, they turned off the ventilation, they cut off all access of air to it, and they flooded it with CO2. Now, that doesn't put out the electrical vehicle fire. The batteries are still going to burn in an atmosphere where there's not enough oxygen, usually to continue combustion. However, the only thing that's going to burn is the lithium-ion batteries. That's it. It's not going to spread to the car. It's not going to spread to adjoining cars. And what you do is get into a defensive stance. You keep the cargo, you keep the fire minimized to the cargo deck. And that's exactly what they did in Zeebrugge. They did that. They actually brought in nitrogen, the pumped nitrogen into the hold to replace the CO2 to ensure there's not enough oxygen. And then they waited for it to cool down so that they can open the compartment. So they don't have what is usually called a backdraft, an induction of air into a smoldering environment, and then you have this big, huge, massive flashover. Well, the Ntsb called out the Newark Fire Department for failing to do the requisite training needed to fight fires. Now, there was a fire back in 2020 on board another car carrier. This was in the city of Jacksonville, Florida. This is the Zhojimin. And there was just literally this couple of weeks ago, this story came out by one of the firefighters, a battalion chief down there, Chip Drysdale, wrote this piece. I'll have the link to it. Nightmare on Blunt Island. You want a stark assessment of how not to do shipboard firefighting? It's what the Jacksonville Fire Department did on board that ship. They had numerous people hurt when they decided to go into a sealed cargo deck to go fight the fire before it cooled down. They did exactly what you're not supposed to do. They opened the hatches, reintroduced air, and they had a massive blowback explosion on deck. It was a textbook thing not to do. And again, we have seen repeatedly issues regarding fires, shipboard fires in the United States. We have seen repeated issues with shipboard fires in the United States. The one that gets me going, even almost as much as Newark. Newark is the one that gets me the most going because we lost 2 firefighters on it. But the next one to that is the Bonhomme Richard fire in July of 2020. Before I started my channel, I actually posted videos to YouTube about this fire when it was happening live. I was basically live streaming some issues. And the absolute insanity of that fire and the amount of wrongness in that fire is just mind-boggling. I have a link up to the videos I did on the Bonhomme Richard fire. You go take a look at them. I wrote this piece, or this piece was written about some of the videos I did by John Conrad over at G-Captain, where it was just, and it's not Monday night quarterbacking. They just did not know how to fight this fire. There were fundamental flaws that happened with the initial response of the ship, their failure to properly use the land-based fire departments that came on there. Matter of fact, the only ones who actually fought fire on the ship were the land-based fire departments. The Port of San Diego does not have fireboats. Those are not fireboats. Those are tugboats with monitors on them. They're great. They're fantastic. You want them there. Those are not fireboats. Fireboats have trained crews on board to fight marine fire. They have the ability to pump ashore to fight fires. They bring a whole litany of skill and technology with them when they come fighting fire. Those are tugboats with monitors. That's a completely different thing. They're great. You need them, but that's not the way you fight fires. And so I've been adamant about this. I've talked about this, how the 2 fires, and I wrote this piece in 2023 for G-Captain, how the fire in 2020, both on Ho Chi Minh and on Bonhomme Richard, should have told us how to fight fires. And the U.S. is woefully inadequately prepared for shipboard fires. Now, there's some departments that do it extremely well. This Fire Department of New York City, extremely well. They team up with an outfit called Resolve Marine down in Florida, where they do annual training down at their ship firefighting simulator. Matter of fact, Resolve Marine just did an entire event down there for Fleet Week. They invited crews from the Navy vessels and Coast Guard vessels on board, and they fought fire. It was a great event. Really hats off to the crew at Resolve Marine. They volunteered to do that. They offered their facility up, and they had a great time. And they encourage departments from around the United States, come down, use the facility, train a core group of people to bring back to your departments so that you will be prepared to do it. We just saw a textbook operation in Belgium of how to fight a fire. Unfortunately, we're not seeing that in the United States. I'm not sure what other things we need to do to trigger that, than to have the fires we had in San Diego, in Jacksonville, and then up in Newark. We need to do a better job about how to fight fires on ships, because I'm a land-based firefighter who shifted from being a marine-based firefighter. And I can tell you, it's 2 different philosophies in how to fight fires. On shipboard fires, you snuff it out. You seal it up, cut off ventilation, and you smother the thing. On land-based fires, when you go to a house fire, ventilation. Ventilation is key. I want to cut the hole in the roof. I want to get air in. I want to push the heat out, and I want to go in and hit the, I want to put the wet stuff on the red stuff, get to the seat of the fire, and put it out. We've got to train land-based firefighters how to do it. And it's not just in the major ports. Shipboard firefighting happens everywhere. We are seeing this around the entire country, and I would argue around the world. Belgium showed they can do it, but Belgium is not the rest of the world. We need to be able to deal with this. There are 100,000 ships, over 1,000 gross tons, sailing around the world right now. This is a problem with ships coming into port and potential firefighting. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Hit that super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. Till our next episode, this is Sal, signing off.